and welcome to Talking F1. We're a podcast from Grand Prix Grandstand that does more or less what that title says. We talk about F1. More specifically, we talk about Formula All. That means Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3 and the W Series. I'm your host, Jim Kimberley, and today I'm joined by regulars Thiemo Albers-Daly and Jacob Phillips. How are you, fellas?
Not too bad. Yourself?
Yeah, doing very well, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm doing really. Thanks, Jim.
Great. And also joining the fun this week is Hannah Prydderch, who is an editor at Inside F2 and a Formula E writer for Motorsport Week. And I butchered your name, I'm sure, Hannah, but how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. I can't wait to get to chat about all the exciting events from over the weekend.
Yeah, hell of a weekend it was. And we've got plenty to discuss with Formula 2 returning after a 2-month break with 3 good races, 2 drivers returning to the top step, and 1 record-breaking breakout star. There was another Monaco Grand Prix where the TV directors outdid themselves for really bad TV direction, and the W Series revved up their engines for the first time since 2019. And we've got some words from a championship favourite about her thoughts on the Anglesey test. But let's start with Formula 2, guys. It's 2 months without racing, and what I thought was a pretty good return. Monaco, Formula 1, always a bit meh. But Hannah, Formula 2 this weekend, 3 good races, 2 potentially excellent races, and 1 pretty good.
Yeah, I would say overall, Formula 2 clearly outdid Formula 1 in terms of the action in Monaco. I think it does prove Formula 2 is better there, same with Formula E. I don't think Formula 1 suits the circuit particularly well, but I think overall, I would say very exciting weekend. The fact that we had rain in Monaco, I think, was an interesting one. It was going to be difficult for a lot of the drivers anyway, given that I think the only driver who had experience of Monaco in the wet conditions was Oscar Piastri, and that did kind of show to Mark, though that wasn't his best race. But I think overall, especially with the double reverse grid format, I think it suited Formula 2 quite well. I think the only difficulty within Monaco is just with overtaking being so problematic, whether it actually makes more sense to do it as a bit of like a bonus or like a World Cup race rather than a traditional F2 round, because there was some overtaking and there was some very good overtaking, but it wasn't as brilliant as, say, Bahrain was.
No, Bahrain really set us up well for this championship. Thiemo, your thoughts with Formula 2's first triple race weekend at Monaco?
Yeah, I've got to concur, but I think not necessarily just a problem for Monaco, but just Formula 2 generally, whenever they get back going again, the first race of the weekend is always kind of, it's not bad, but it's always the least best one of the lot. So I definitely felt that with the first one this time around. I mean, we got a great last minute overtake at the end of the race between, I think, Armstrong and Deledda, if I'm remembering correctly. But aside from that, I can't honestly remember an awful lot about what happened in that one. But I mean, then the rain on Saturday just made everything a little bit more interesting and spiced things up nicely. And then Sunday's race, again, it just Saturday's race. I'm just so used to
so
it.
confusing,
Monaco
right?
every year. But yeah, Saturday's feature race. Then it was. I think it was better than what we were necessarily hoping for, and I think I agree with Hannah. It was definitely better than the F1 race in terms of quality, and there was definitely a bit more action going on there, I think. So it was a surprise, but a welcome one.
Indeed, it was. I really enjoyed the feature race in particular. It was a cracker. Jacob, we've got Zhou extending his lead at the top of the championship, and we had him winning sprint race 1, the reverse grid. Is he lucky by getting that qualifying position in 10th place that he could just have that at Monaco and not really feel any threat?
Well, yeah, that's obviously how the format works, and we know how Monaco has been down the years. You can't overtake, so it's just he lucked in with the format, and obviously no one's going to really be able to overtake him. But I did think he did well to control the pace at the front. But yeah, it certainly wasn't the best opening race. And I do think actually it sort of lends back to a few fears I had at the start of the season. If you go back to one of my previous articles on the GP Grandstand website, I talked about the format and a few problems I thought it would bring up. I think because the first race, there's now 3 races. I do think the first race, and we'll probably sit in Baku and further on in the season as well, will be a little bit less. There'll be a little bit less action because obviously you crash in that, you're going to be starting at the back in race 2. So I do think that The format certainly wasn't the best here in Monaco. And like Hannah said, I think that, and certainly for the F1 as well, maybe we should make it sort of like a non-championship event, or sort of like a showpiece event every year, sort of like a Super Bowl style thing.
Yeah, the Formula One teams coming out with, well, McLaren in particular, coming out with that golf livery. And it did make me think maybe this is the way to make it more entertaining, by having the drivers in classic race suits or some sort of non-impactful in terms of racing, but a visual spectacle for us to see something different in F1. But that's F1, and now I want to concentrate on Formula 2. Hannah, we've got a superstar potential with the rookie Theo Pourchaire doing amazingly. How did you find his whole weekend, particularly qualifying and then the feature race?
I was majorly impressed by his performance. I think anyone who watched his Formula 3 campaign last year knew he was quick, knew he had the talent there. But the fact that he's 17 baffles me. It makes me feel very old at 23. But I think he just showed, I think, a level of not just speed, but maturity. In fact, my youngest driver on the grid, obviously, has now taken the title from Lando Norris as the youngest race winner in Formula 2. But also, he's never raced at Monaco. Some of the other drivers hadn't as well, but had either a year's experience in Formula 2 or had no experience elsewhere that would aid them. Whereas he was coming in pretty much blind to it. And I think he showed why he is a championship contender. I think it would be, there may be some people that thought, oh, the rookies, they'll play a factor in the championship, but maybe not as much as they do. But at the moment, I think it's 4 of the top 10 are all rookie drivers. Theo Pourchaire's up there fighting. If he has consistent weekends, I could see him being probably a top 3 finisher. I think it all depends on what happens going forward. But the Monaco weekend for me highlighted why he is such a good driver. He could have quite easily binned it in the wall. Drivers with a lot more experience did, but he showed that maturity and confidence in his own driving. And to see him win his like quasi home race, I get emotional, I think, warmed everyone's heart. So it was great to see.
Yeah, and Robert Schwartzman showing just how painful a poor start can be in that first race, taking his wing off. I never really saw the full incident. I just saw him going wide at Casino Square. Did we see any of that, guys?
I didn't see him until he was in the pits, to be honest. I thought, what have I missed? I swear I was watching this, and then he was just gone. I was like, well, don't know what's happened there, but maybe we'll show later, and they just never got back to it.
Yeah, well, another rookie as well as Pourchaire is Robert's teammate Piastri, who was the epitome of consistent across the weekend. He's looking like a potential championship challenger as well, Thiemo. We've got these rookies coming up from F3. I know you watched F3 last year. Are you surprised by how quickly they've adapted to the Formula 2 world?
Piastri, not so much. I mean, Pourchaire, not so much either, to be honest. I mean, just going back slow, Pourchaire, he didn't have the best opening round in Bahrain, but that can be forgiven because, like we keep saying, they're rookies. They need to get a bit of time to get up to speed with everything. But like I said, if they can be consistent like this, then there's no reason why they can't be in the top places by the end of the season. And Piastri just kind of hit the ground running last time out and continued with it this time, which after a 2-month break, you've got to admit, pretty impressive. And I mean, having Mark Webber in your corner certainly doesn't hurt anything either. So I wonder how much coaching is going on there, or how much of it is just a good job and keep doing what you're doing, and that's just enough motivation for him. But the fact that he's the closest person to Zhou at the moment in the championship is astounding when you've got people like Schwartzman and Lunga and Lawson, not Lawson, sorry, but a few others that are a bit further down where you'd be expecting them to be much further up. And it was great to see Piastri doing so consistently over the weekend. So I'm not surprised, I'm just happy.
Lawson could well have been a bit further up there. I want to go on to the infamous penalty with it, but Jacob Alpine Academy looking pretty handy this year. We've got a very disappointing, but not really through his fault, Christian Lundgaard's weekend. Championship really stuttering at the moment. But with Zhou and Piastri, are Alpine looking like they're going to take the F2 crown this year?
Well, it certainly looks that way. At the start of the season, I thought that the Ferrari Academy would have something to show for that, and I thought Schwartzman would be contending. But we're a quarter of the way through the season now, and Schwartzman's not there, so you've got to think that Alpine and the Alpine drivers are very much top of that list. You've got Zhou, who has performed remarkably well. this season. Certainly looking like he's going to, be one of the favourites for the championship now. And Piastri, as Thiemo said, I had no doubts coming into this season that he would perform to the highest level. And Lundgaard's got a bit unlucky as well. So the only headache now for Alpine as they look to go up to F1 is where are these drivers going to go? And that's the age-old problem in Formula 2. With obviously Alonso going to be there for another couple of years, and I don't think Ocon's going to go anywhere anytime soon. So, but they're certainly, going to force Alpine's hand, and there's going to be a few decisions to be made.
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult. I feel quite bad for them because they are looking like the favourites at the moment, in my opinion. And Renault, it's been a problem they've had for a little while. They don't even have that engine partnership to maybe palm somebody off there for a discount. So a real conundrum. We'll see how that turns out by the end of the season. But we did touch on Lundgaard there, and he was one of several drivers who had what would be a Monaco weekend to forget. Spraying oil everywhere, Hannah, on sprint race 1, and I think he's come away with no points for the weekend. How disappointed he's going to be?
I think he's going to be very disappointed. I feel like the worst thing is, especially in sprint race 1, Lundgaard had the pace. He was doing relatively well. He was able to kind of get himself up there and get fighting. But the problem was, qualifying maybe wasn't the greatest thing in the world. I think he should have done a bit better in qualifying. And I think the problem is sprint race 1, not his fault. Smoke bellowing out of the back of his car, leaving oil all over the track. Sometimes it's Formula 2. Reliability issues are probably more common than I think people may care to admit. Sprint race 2, locking up and going deep into Monaco. I would say rookie mistake, but he's not a rookie. I think that was the irony, that it was actually the more experienced drivers in the championship having the issues around the Monaco circuit than the fact that if he hadn't locked up, if he'd maybe been a bit more conservative, he probably would have finished late, possibly got points. And it proves the fact that for a lot of these drivers, is this bad weekend is going to plague him for a while, considering that given the shortened championship, we're a quarter of the way through the season already.
Mental. You
can't afford to have bad weekends. Look at Schwartzman last year. The Silverstone doubleheader ruined his championship. And in the end, if you're Lundgaard, if you've seen Zhou win, lead the championship, and Oscar Piastri along with him, you're sat there thinking, I'm the third Alpine driver. It doesn't matter whether if he gets up into the top 5, if you are the third Alpine driver with 2 seasons experience compared to Oscar's rookie season, you must be thinking, I'm on thin ice here, because I think Alpine will probably, 1 or 2 of those drivers are getting cut at the end of the season, because I can't see them keeping 3 juniors, all of a similar age, all of a similar experience. Oscar probably has the advantage of, if he doesn't win, he can have a second season. If he does win, golden. So if I was Lundgaard, I would be very worried and ruining the fact that my weekend didn't go to plan, because it's going to come and bite him towards the back end of the season when points are so crucial.
I think that's why Monaco is such an important venue, though, and why, going back slightly on saying about, well, maybe not make it a championship event, I think that's exactly why it should be one, because, okay, the overtaking might not be a big factor there, but there's so many other challenges there that if you can master it like Pourchaire or Piastri or Zhou were doing over the weekend, then it shows a whole other skill set that the driver's got to be able to keep up with the mental side of things over such a long race distance in such close quarters in the tightest street circuit there is. And the extra pressure of it being a classic race where there's that prestige to it as well. If you can do that, then you deserve to get all the points for being able to stay ahead, because even if you qualify in first, doesn't guarantee you'll stay there. And if you have a bad qualifying, it's again, you need to show that you can't just be a good racing driver, you need to be good in qualifying, because otherwise, if you can't overtake, then you're buggered a bit. So it's I think that's a thing where if you have a bad weekend, then okay, we could be having this conversation at Baku as well with the exact same problems. But again, you need those consistent things, and if you don't have anywhere, and if you're not a rookie, then your chances are going to run out pretty soon.
I'd say with the getting pole position and then not sticking there, I think sprint race 1, sprint race 2 exemplifies that with Armstrong and then Lawson. How devastating for both drivers, but could you imagine driving around Monaco for 45 minutes, crossing the line first, only to find out because you had an incorrect throttle map setting that you didn't actually win the race? And Tictum, in all fairness, drove Sublime as well, but even he would know that that wasn't a deserving win, certainly not the kind of win he wants to be taking. Liam Lawson's penalty. Jacob, did you have any views about this throttle map setting? Did you hear all about the ins and outs?
Yeah, I did hear about the ins and outs of it, and it's just really, really unfair for Lawson. He drove a fantastic race. It would have been his second victory of the season. He's really impressing, and certainly going to be impressing Helmut Marko and the Red Bull backers as well. But, comes back to the old adage in motorsport, we hear it several times from many of the drivers up and down the various categories. You win as a team, you lose as a team, but it's nothing more, no more harsher than in F2, because obviously, they're there, all their backers are there, and they're trying to really, really get a step up there to Formula One. Sorry. So, but I mean, what can you do as Lawson? But it's harsh. But maybe there should be a way of giving docking team points or something like that, or maybe giving him a grid drop for the next race. But yeah, there's not a lot he can do there realistically.
So disqualification was quite harsh, I think. Like, for maybe a 5-second penalty or something, because ultimately it didn't get that much of an advantage anyway. And you've got to admit that, I mean, there was still all the possibility that he would still go into the first corner on lap 1 in first place. So disqualifying just seemed a bit over the top. But I think that's a lot of problems that I had with stewards over everything over the weekend, so it didn't help.
Am I right in saying that Tictum had a similar issue last year in Monza? So it's kind of a bit of a redemption there that he picked up the victory through this.
Yeah, Tictum had the issue with the failure to provide a fuel sample with his victory. I think the difficulty was with that was clear. It was a bit, I don't know whether it's more clear cut. I think in Lawson's situation was that throttle map didn't give him an advantage. He had actually, I'd argue, of the top 3, he had the worst start of them all. And at one point it looked like Tictum was going to get him. I think disqualifying him, it proves maybe how inconsistent the rules are, maybe sometimes how disproportionate they are for me. A throttle map, if he'd have had, an engine setting or something like that had given him a lot more speed, then yes, disqualify him. But a throttle map didn't give him an advantage, give him a 5 to 10 second time penalty. And I kind of find it a little bit ironic because, say, if you look at things that have happened in Formula 2 in the past, like last year, the fact that several drivers ran with an engine deficit and things like that, it just proves that there are maybe more technical issues surrounding those cars than maybe it's clear on track.
So you want drivers winning races based on how well they are driving. At the end of the day, you don't want them to getting done for some stupid technical thing. So it's like if you look at the race without anything else to it on the Saturday, you think, who is the best driver there? Liam Lawson, because he did everything he needed to from start to finish. So it's but hey,
I think disproportionate is the exactly correct word on it. I understand when you break a rule that you then should be punished, but in terms of the punishments going through a 5-second penalty, 10-second drive through, stop, go, all the way to a disqualification, incorrect throttle map setting, if you looked at the list of what should we apply to this, disqualification seems so harsh. And for me, it seemed like it was something that, because they didn't know during the race, they might have pulled him in for a drive-through or something like that. And with the pace it was showing, it wouldn't have hurt him so much. He would have walked away with some points still. But to go from what was essentially pole position after Armstrong's issue to dead last and disqualified, yeah, really, really painful.
So that's the other problem I've got with it, being that it was after the race as well by a significant amount of time. You've got to think that the stewards and FIA have all this data well in advance because it's their job. And so it's like, why not? If again, you should have this information, you should have enough people working for you to be able to see this ahead of time to again say, okay, we'll give them a drive-through penalty and see what happens, rather than, you don't want to you want to win the race on track. You don't want to win it an hour or so later when you've already gone home.
Yeah, that's I think it's Vips that ended up getting on the podium, but not on the podium. Like it reminds me of those.
We've seen it a lot in F2 and F1 in the last couple of years. It's just getting a bit annoying now.
Carlos Sainz, for example.
The Brazil, exactly. That's what I was thinking of. That's his first podium. It's not how you want to celebrate it. So for Vips, that would have been the first podium in Formula 2, I believe, that he would have got. And that right? Or did he get one? Did he get one last year with his?
Did he get
brief-
Magello?
Could have been Magello.
I think
First
he-
one this
I
season,
think he got
definitely.
that, yeah.
And that's, I don't know if he gets the trophy. I presume he does. But it's handed to him like, here you go, mate. In the garage afterwards. He's not on the podium celebrating at Monaco. So it's a tough ride. But Hannah, I want to go to you on this because I feel like you're a pent up frustration, as we all are. But the Deledda issue, we're talking now about penalties for Lawson, and then the 107% rule. That is a rule that has existed to prevent poor drivers and poor teams from racing. And I will come out and say that today, Michael Massey has come out to say that they have said there were mechanical issues with Deledda to be so far off the pace. To me, that doesn't necessarily excuse anything, if that's correct, and I've got to take it at face value that it is. But if a car is that far off the pace, I just thought at this point it's not helping anybody, Deledda or the sport, by having him run.
Yeah, I think it's a strange one. I read the same thing about what Michael Massey said. I said, and it's a difficult one. I would say if it is mechanical issues, and he was, say for example, with Zhou, who had shown that he had the pace in practice, had shown he had the pace throughout the season, then yes, I'd have turned around and said, it's clearly the mechanical issue, given the benefit of the doubt. But the fact of the matter is, Deledda has been off the pace all year. And for me, it's that frustrating factor in Formula 2 is that you, in theory, if you've got the money, you can get into Formula 2 whether you deserve to be there or not. I think it maybe proves why Formula 1 was maybe smart in bringing in the super license rules to at least allow a certain level of experience and kind of promise from drivers that you can't just be a nobody and jump up. I think for me, Formula 2 needs to do a similar thing. It needs to start bringing in restrictions on if you haven't finished so high up in the past couple of championships you've done, you shouldn't be there, because the fact that Deledda didn't really have the quality heading into Formula 2 and has shown time and time again that he's not just off the pace, he's in like Formula 2.5. He's not anywhere near them. And especially on Monaco, when we saw some incidents, I was, to be honest, surprised he wasn't caught up in one. It did run the risk of, you could have had a major incident with a car that far behind. We also know how difficult the blue flags were to manage. And I think, for me, I don't see why the FIA have rules if they're not going to enforce them. They were overly harsh on Lawson and overly generous on Deledda, and it just makes you think, why are penalties and rules not being applied consistently in the championship? Because it takes away from the championship in my eyes if you're going to have one rule for one and another for the other.
Something that did make me laugh on the F2 thing with regards to Deledda was the opening titles they've got for before the race, and it's like that whole thing is like Stars of Tomorrow Today. You've got a few of the drivers. You don't have all of them, because I watched it the second day and thought, oh, maybe I missed a couple. No. I'll just take a few of them. And Deledda's in there, and I'm thinking someone's having a laugh there, surely, or is that just he's written a check to someone?
Jacob, did you have any suggestions on how 107% rule should work? Is it as clear cut as you don't make it, you don't race?
Well, it's not often we see the 107% rule breached, is it? Certainly not an F1 anymore, and you'd like to think certainly not an F2 as well. But, like Hannah said, it's fairly dangerous for him to be, a second off a lap, and I think after 15. Was he lapped after 15 laps or something?
11
laps, wow.
I'm sorry, he was a minute behind after 11. He could have been lapped at 15. You're quite right.
Yeah, no, that's really poor. And on a circuit like Monaco, we saw how much blue flags come into it in all the categories. It's very dangerous for him to be racing around. But I do feel like, though, he needs experience. And although he's paid for a seat, the best way for him to get experience is track time. And it's certainly not going to help him if we ban him from racing. But I think he was so far behind this weekend that, like I say, it's dangerous. And I think it stinks of FIA inconsistency as well, as Hannah alluded to. Lawson, overly harsh, he's lost his win and how sad that was. And then Deledda's just allowed to, amble around at the back at his own pace, getting in the way of drivers. But yeah, I do think, it just kind of like, if rules are there, well, we have to enforce them. Otherwise, what's the point? They might not as well have the rules. So But I do think Deledda was lucky to race. I'm not sure I buy the technical difficulties, certainly not for 3 days anyway. It might have hindered him, a couple of tenths or 5 tenths, but the majority of that pace deficit was his own talent, which, for me, so far this season, he just doesn't have.
Pay drivers, Thiemo, they have been an affliction to racing for all time, really. It's a rich man's game. Roy Nissany, speaking of which, he got a podium. What do we
Your
think of
favourite moment of the weekend?
I
was so happy for you.
I'm not Nissany's biggest fan. He's a Williams junior driver that's not a junior. But in fairness to him, in that first race, didn't make any mistakes. Not so much in the second race when he whacked the barrier pretty hard. But Thiemo, first podium in F2. Shall we make note of this?
You can make note of it, sure. I mean, it was a good drive by him. Fair play to him. Again, when you deliver and you deserve it, then why not? Get the recognition for it. I think if it wasn't for the money, would he still be there? And would he have gotten the opportunity? Maybe not, but that's the way things are at the moment. So at the end of the day, he still had to do the drive, and he did the job perfectly. Well, perfectly for what it was, and take it, and it's a good job at the end of the day. But I think the driver that impressed me a bit more, to be honest, across the whole weekend as well, was Boschong.
Yeah, shout out to Boschong time. He was Mr. Consistent as well in a car that's not going to be challenging right up at the top. He was proving how Monaco can make a team or somebody who doesn't ordinarily have the pace get a good haul of points, and he really, really did with some of his best finishes.
It was quite a funny contrast between him and Nissany, given the pay difference with money and everything as well, because I think I heard as well that the hotel he was staying in Monaco, he did a deal with them for some sponsorship so he could have the room cheaper, just so he could make sure he could go racing. And then he's up there battling for the podium in Monaco, and you think that's gone pretty well for him. He's probably get a few more sponsor deals off the back of that, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. It's good to see. And I don't know if I'm just one of these people that want to have the underdog win. Hannah, was Boschong, am I being a bit too generous, thinking, yeah, that's gone, teach him a lesson because he's the antithesis of a pay driver? Or is this something we should just be celebrating, that what seems to be a very nice guy has done so well?
I would celebrate, especially in the fact there is that underdog thing. That's the one thing I do like about Formula 2 is you do have them moments where somebody that you don't think's any good comes out from nowhere and it's like, ta-da, I'm here. Like, I think practically everyone, for example, like Jack Aitken is a brilliant driver, but he's sometimes a bit of an underdog and not always in the best car, and then he comes out and does well, and you're just thinking, my day is made. And I think it does prove to me why Formula 2 does need to do more about tackling paid drivers, because it proves that talent isn't always synonymous with money. I think Nissany, fair enough, did well, but should he be in Formula 2 by this point? Maybe not. Whereas Rob Boschong, they need to do more to get funding for drivers. If you look, I think they've ruled out the possibility of things like scholarships and things like that for drivers, or an investment program in it. And that's the issue of, you've got a lot of talented drivers coming up the junior ranks that don't have the money. God knows how Rob Boschong got his money together to be able to do it. The fact that he was being a wheeler dealer at the hotel, I think, just sums up maybe actually what makes some of the drivers pretty great, is that they've got that level of kind of, I think.
So when you don't have all the money on your side, you're more hungry for, and you really want to make it work that much better.
Yeah.
And I think that the work ethic then goes with that, because if you don't have it, you ain't going to get anywhere.
Absolutely. Like, he knows he's got one shot at this now. Yes, he's done Formula 2 before, but he knows it's his last chance. And I think he's just out. I don't think he'll get into Formula 1. I think he maybe recognises that. But if he can show his talents, he can get seats, for example, in World Endurance. Same as, for example, Richard Verschoor. If he doesn't get a full season, I will be so disappointed, because he's driving the legs off that MP Motorsport at the moment, and he doesn't have the funding behind him. So I would joke, if someone wants to set up a GoFundMe page for Richard Verschoor's F2 career, I think it's probably needed, because he just deserves it. And I think Formula 2 would be worse off if it allows money to continue to dominate the series, when there's clearly so many talents coming up the junior ranks that aren't getting a chance to shine.
That's how GP Grandstand becomes a title sponsor in F2.
Yeah, my problem with GoFundMe page is there are just so many drivers that I'd want to be donating to, because they're just those ones who haven't been able to continue on for various reasons, mainly tied to finances. Briefly, just want to touch up talking about drivers when finances. Nannini, no longer racing in F2, is doing a dual campaign. So my heart bleeds a little bit less than it usually would, because he's still going to be enjoying the better tracks in Formula 3. But Jack Aitken making a return, Jacob, happy to see him back?
Yeah, no, really happy to see him back. And if they are looking for money, of course, they could have gone to the casino this weekend and put it all on black. But yes, very happy to see Aitken back. Obviously, he had a stint in F1 for a couple of races there at the tail end of the last season. Or was it just, I think it was just Sakir. But yeah, it's great to see him back. And I was, upset that he wasn't going to be in F2 this year, because he had a great campaign last year and really drove the legs of his car. And yeah, like you said, my heart isn't bleeding for Nannini at all. I think it's a bit greedy. I think you should stick to one or the other. To be fair, Nannini wasn't bad last time out in Barcelona, but I think that Aitken is a much better driver. So yeah, I'm happy to see Aitken back in F2, and I think he can. Obviously, he's in the HWA Race Lab car, so he's not going to have the best results this season, but it might be a sort of like a Logan Sargent kind of situation, a great driver in an underperforming car, and we might see him push the HWA race up that grid and get some points for that team.
I think it's a good thing for Nannini as well, because now that he's fully focusing on one, and it's the lower of the two categories, we can see where he's really at ability-wise. Like, should he have been in F2 the whole time, or is F3 where he should be at actually instead?
I think, Jacob, you're right. Nannini in F3 did seem to do pretty well at Barcelona, and very anonymous at Bahrain in F2. So yeah, could have found his level. But that's how things are going to go. And Aitken is now in for, I believe, the season. Am I right in saying that?
I thought it was just for Baku and Monaco for now, but I mean, I'll take him for the season.
I think you're right. 2 races at the moment, but this is like the second MP seat we're talking about for sure. And just going to keep that on stringing us along to see what the seat situation is. One of those unique, not necessarily unique, but one of those differences with F1 and F2 that you just don't know who's going to be driving in the seats come later in the season. But that'll keep us on our toes. Now, a driver that did well at Bahrain, and we had a comment on YouTube from Vaibhav, again, mispronouncing names, that's my thing. But I wanted to bring up Deledda because he's a potential contender for the championship. He's certainly one of Red Bull's stronger drivers, but unfortunate timing, because it wasn't the best weekend for Deledda Thiemo this weekend. He didn't really do himself any favors, struggled. He almost got reverse grid pole, but it didn't work out for him, did it?
No, a bit of a weekend to forget for him overall, really. I mean, it's a brilliant bit of driving by Armstrong in the last corner, essentially, of the first sprint race, to just sneak past him in such a cheeky move that I just loved. But obviously, you don't love it if you're Deledda. Ultimately, didn't work out too well for Armstrong for the second sprint race, but I mean, even then for Deledda, it didn't go too well then either. And then the feature race was kind of just a disaster for him. And after Bahrain, I think it was one of the big shocks, I think.
It could have been a podium visit, Hannah, if he didn't. I looked at the move, and Armstrong did barge and strong arm him out the way quite a bit. And I was happy in one sense, because it was finally some action in what was a relatively straightforward affair. But yeah, it would have been a completely different weekend, I suppose, if he maintained 10th place there and started the second race on pole position.
Absolutely. I think it was a difficult situation with that move from Armstrong. I think in my mind, I kind of thought it's fair. It's Formula 2. They're going, the gaps are small. Sometimes you're going to have to do a bit of argy-bargy to get yourself through. And overall, I can't really fault him for going for it. And I think Deledda was rightfully annoyed about it, as you would be if you'd lost reverse grid pole, because it did kind of set up the rest of his weekend to be a bit not great. And I think for me was that whether he could have got a win, I think he didn't necessarily have the pace throughout the whole weekend. So I think it was likely that Lawson would have overtaken him. Although if Lawson then would have had the throttle map issue, he'd have got disqualified. So that would have been a whole other situation. But I don't think his pace is there. Of the two Carlins, Ticktum was clearly the faster driver all weekend. Yes, Tictum had mistakes, but overall he was the quicker car. And I think the difficulty was in the feature race was obviously loses a place off the start, so he's already on the back foot, damaged his front wing very early on, then gets a time, has to have the extended pit stop in order to get the front wing changed, then gets a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, which is his own fault. And then contact with Jean-Luc Petikov was just like the nail in the coffin for his weekend. The thing with Petikov does squeeze him into the wall, but it just shows, I think, sometimes it's how difficult racing on Monaco is for a lot of the drivers. And I think he will be frustrated because at the moment, being beaten by his teammate, he's being beaten by Red Bull Junior, who's a rookie. I think with Lawson doing so well, it does show the difficult positions, I think, for Alpine's drivers in the same way for the Red Bull Juniors. There's 3 of them in the championship each. The rookies at the moment are maybe to some degree showing up, the more experienced drivers, although Guanyu Zhou's leading, so that doesn't really stick. But I think just for Deledda, he needs a good weekend. He had difficulties last year, partially to do with the engine. I think also that he didn't have necessarily the most consistent run, and the problem is you can't have weekends like this. Speeding in the pit lane was daft. Sometimes maybe if moves come in that it's risky, maybe it is safer to bail out and avoid contact. And I think it just shows sometimes is whether some drivers drive in the moment and some drivers drive in the bigger picture. If you look at, say, for example, Piastri and Tictum, they were very lucky. Tictum went for a move that was risky, whether he should have done it, hindsight, but Piastri gave enough room that he kind of was able to get out of it without incident and ended up getting the podium. So overall, I would say Deledda just needs a better run of luck in Baku because, to be honest, he's not really lighting up the grid. And I think he's getting clearly overshadowed by his rivals. Well, I'd say Lawson, Vips is still having probably the unluckiest F2 campaign I've seen.
I'm glad you mentioned Petikov there because I was wondering who's more unlucky this weekend, Deledda or Petikov. I just had to feel from a little bit. It was like the guy cannot catch a break.
His car can break. Certainly, it's very dramatic on the practice session, wasn't it? With
just the practice and then the first sprint race and the second sprint race and go, and then the feature race. It was like, okay, things are going all right, and then he gets a penalty, and it's like, oh, for God's sake, just nothing is going his way at all here.
No. Oh. I think Hannah, you raised a good point with the defence that Piastri mounted at Masterclass with Tictum. Tictum obviously not benefiting that well, but that showed how to defend that corner. Carlin really not going to be enjoying.
Which ironically, the rookie knows what to do there, but the experienced driver is caught napping there.
It's a bit caught napping, but we saw with Schumacher at Monaco, was 2 years ago, that's not the place you typically want to be doing overtakes. It's so dangerous to do, and the chances are you are going to hit each other. So Armstrong did strong arm his way through there. Totally not deliberate, that, by the way. But yeah, Deledda, Jacob, he's still got 3/4 of the season to make his mark again, and we saw how strong he was last year. We can't write him off yet, can we?
No, of course, one bad weekend doesn't make a bad driver, and we saw how capable he was in Bahrain. So, just not his weekend. Maybe he didn't like the track, and he was kind of unlucky as well. Just a bit anonymous, really. But we're going to Baku, and I'm sure he'll perform better there. And then we're going to loads of other races as well. So, I think can't write him off just yet, and he's certainly going to be a strong contender because F2, anything can happen, and that championship could all flip on his head. So, have a good weekend in Baku, and he can be right back in the picture.
Definitely does highlight the impact of the 3 races in a weekend, though, with all the points available there. So, you can't afford to have a bad weekend, but it's bound to happen to you sooner or later, and when it does, it gets you extra hard this time around.
I'm quite thankful, or Deledda should be, but I'm quite thankful that Formula 2 is returning so much quicker because unlike the first round where you're stewing on a poor weekend, like potentially Schwartzman could be, you're stewing on that for months. If Deledda's had a bad weekend this weekend, or Petikov, you can bounce back within 2 weeks now. So that's awesome to see Formula 2 having a bit more activity through the summer. I know we've got some long breaks at the tail end of the season, but great to see. Segue directly into long breaks. So W Series, now they know how to have a long break with COVID going from August, Brands Hatch 2019, August 2019 at Brands Hatch, where they last raced. They're back. They were testing in a private test at Anglesey. I didn't know they had a track there. It looks stunning.
A nice track.
Yeah, it looks. I don't know how to race it. I've not done in a sim or anything like that, but it looks like a gorgeous place right next to the coast. Of course, one of the days, high winds. Who knew that you'd have high winds in Wales?
Honestly, never.
Exactly. And I see you looking outside the window to check how high the winds are. I am so happy to see WC's back, but most importantly, I'm happy to see WC's coming back with some super sexy liveries. That was a bit of feedback which I internalized, I didn't verbalize, and how similar they looked and how difficult it was to pick out drivers, especially when they're changing cars. It looks like this season, at long last, it could be a cracker. So what do we know, Hannah, from the W Series testing? There's not much to see in terms of times that have been internal, but what do we know?
To be honest, not a lot from the testing times. They've not released anything to the public. I think it was quite interesting. They had a couple of drivers that were invited to go there. So it wasn't, I don't think all of the drivers that were expected to compete in the season were there because I think someone got stuck due to COVID restrictions. But overall, I'd say it was interesting to see that they were testing in Anglesey because they normally, I think where they went last year, was it Valencia? I think
they were meant to go to Valencia this year, and then the travel restrictions had such an issue for them.
I was very happy to see them testing in Anglesey, although I was gutted because I'm the opposite. For once in my life, I'm the opposite end of Wales, so I couldn't go. But I think it was overall, it was nice to see them testing somewhere different as well. Obviously, the weather wasn't ideal, but I think the fact that they've had tested in difficult conditions can only aid them, especially with new drivers that have made it into the series this year. You've tested your cars in probably the worst conditions you will see all year. I don't think, for example, the Red Bull Ring is going to get any worse than what they saw in Anglesey, and the liveries. I have to hats off the W Series for that because it proves how much they listen to their fans. I'm not going to lie, I followed championships where, say, for example, Fracker, where there's 30 odd cars in the championship, and it does get difficult to distinguish them. But in WCs, it wasn't even just the ones that were same teams, things like that. They were so similar, and it was incredibly difficult to follow. And I like the fact that they're kind of tailored to each of the drivers. I'd like to see, to be honest, Formula 1 and Formula 2 do something similar. Like, for example, the fact that Callum Ilott, you and I virtuously last year was red, whereas Brand Shows was yellow. If you had those differences between the cars, I think it's nice, and I think it shows off the more. It makes the car and it makes kind of the relationship between the driver and the car a bit more engaging, a bit more personal than, say, for example, Deruvula, Vips, and Lawson in F2, two different teams, but their cars are pretty much identical. And it's funny when the commentators mistake one for the other, but I think overall, hats off to W Series. I'm extremely excited to see it back on the Formula One Support Series calendar, and to see, to be honest, I have to say, for the circuits that they've got this year, they've actually had probably of the Junior Series, I would say, the best calendars. Me, not the biggest fan of the double header, but circumstances may. But overall, they've got some very exciting tracks, some great flyaways, and so I can't wait for them to get out there.
Just touching on your point there, Hannah, the double header is never ideal, and we'd like to see a whole variety of tracks. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have two, or I'd rather have 1,000 races in the Red Bull Ring. And Jim certainly knows my love for that track. I'm a huge fan of that track, so I'm kind of glad that it's replacing France for the W Series there, because one less race at France is always going to benefit us, because our eyes are certainly going to hurt looking at that bloody run off for 10 hours at a time. So yeah, I'm pleased that we are going to Spielberg twice, and they do have a good calendar as well. Am I right in saying we got Spa on there, Zandvoort, which I'm actually hopefully going to. I've got tickets for that, so hopefully I'll get to the W Series in action. Yeah, very hard to get tickets for that, but fingers crossed for travel restrictions and everything. But I think they're rivaling F3 for the best calendar, I think
they might actually have it as well. On the side that I do like Silverstone, but that's maybe because of it's Silverstone. I've been there so many times, because F3 aren't going there, F2 are. And now the F3 are sticking with France and W Series are sticking on the date and staying at Austria. I think, like you say, Jacob, losing France, sticking with Austria, tremendous. And as we saw with Formula One last year, Austria it's a spectacular track. I've been there twice, and it's in the mountains, and it rains just out of nowhere, and there's no guarantee we're going to have anything like the same race. We didn't have the same race in Formula One last year. I think the first race we had something like 9 retirements, had that Albon Hamilton issue. It was just completely different to the second race. I'm so excited that W Series have managed to, one, get on the calendar with F1, and then that they're going to be back. And I think I'm more excited the fact they're going to be back in Austria than they're going to be starting this season with France. And now, because of that, they're starting the season with no other support series to take the shine off a little bit. Their season finale is just them in Formula One, and now their season opener is just them in Formula One. And I'm absolutely delighted about it. Thiemo, your thoughts with W Series? It's going to be back next month. Very excited?
Yeah, I mean, Hannah pretty much just nicked all of my points, so I just kind of have to agree with her completely there. But it was great to see them testing. I think Anglesey is a great place to do testing, to be honest, because I mean, I've seen it a few times being used just for general driving and then a few races. And I think Jamie Chadwick summed it up well. So it's a great place to do the testing because you don't know when you're going to get those conditions next. And when you do, it'll count for points rather than just for a testing session. So good to get that potential worst case scenario out of the way early on. And the liveries all look sublime. I mean, I don't know which ones belong to who yet, but when I do, I know I'm going to love all of them. I mean, I had a look at a few of them earlier, and the red and the greens on a couple of the cars there, it's like, oh, now we're talking. That's I want some of that kind of thing, because you see F1 this year, some of the liveries are nice in there, but it's the first time you've had that nice variety in W Series. Like, I can do that, but better, and it just looks so nice. So I can't wait to see it get back going again. So don't share Jacob's immense love for Austria. I enjoy it, but it's a good place. Definitely better than France for the opening round, though. I'll agree on that one.
Yeah. I'm just a fanboy. I love Austria.
It's such a good track. Yeah, it's such a good track and such good to see W Series racing. We can tell that we are trying to glean any information off these brief promo videos and images that have been shared, because we can't take anything from testing times. But I did reach out to a friend of Grand Prix Grandstand, Emma Kimberley, who's hopefully going to be in the title fight once again. She was so quick last time out in 2019. And a direct quote from her here that she can't say anything about the times as it was private testing, but let's say that the grid is very competitive and there are some new awesome drivers that we will see fighting for podium places too. Very exciting. She continues, really good to be back in the car after almost 2 years. For me, the last time in single seaters was in August 2019 at Brands Hatch, but I've found my pace quickly. My aim is nothing less than to win the title. So fighting talk from Emma. She could have won the title last time out if it wasn't for that Megan Giltz incident on the first round to nerf her out of running for 2 races. But yeah, hugely excited to see it. And talking, Hannah, you mentioned that some drivers weren't able to go. They got the Tasman Pepper because South Africa couldn't go to the UK, I think, for COVID restrictions. So Abby Pulling, I believe, was there, which is Alice Powell's mini-me. So good to see her getting some F3 experience too, because hopefully she could be a future star. So yeah, we'll be speaking all about W Series in about a month's time with some actual racing for the first time in about 18 to 24 months. Absolutely nuts. Cannot wait. But of course, we have to talk about Formula One. That was also happening this weekend. And there's about 5 laps of action, which is about 5 laps more than we usually see at Monaco. I want to go through all the headlines, but really the thing that's standing out at the moment, Jacob, Max Verstappen is leading a championship.
Yeah, and I thought that this would be a race that he certainly had to win if he wanted to win the championship. He's now, was it 4 points ahead of Hamilton? Because Hamilton got the fastest lap, and it's the first time he's ever led the championship. So that's a huge hallmark for him, and that will certainly lead him on to give him a lot of confidence for the further rounds. And surprisingly, Red Bull actually lead the championship for the first time in the hybrid era. So that is the takeaway from the race. Although it wasn't a great race, I thought it was. Well, I think you'll all share this opinion. It was certainly the worst one of the season so far. It was Monaco, just a classic Monaco, really. If Bottas hadn't had this problem, which we'll probably touch on in a minute, and Vettel's overtake, which still yet to see, but I think I caught it on Twitter, but we'll talk about that as well. It wasn't a great Monaco, but that is the headline. Max Verstappen leads the championship by 4 points, and although it wasn't a great race, the result was interesting, and it certainly sets us up for a great season ahead.
Championship fight is on. Hannah, we've got Lewis Hamilton moaning on the radio. Bad for him, bad for Mercedes, great for us.
Absolutely. I think I'd love to see the state of Toto's table after that round in Monaco, because I full on reckon he's put his fist through it. That was just, to me, a lot of people gave Red Bull stick after the last one, saying, oh, it was Hungary 2019 all over again. They should have learned that Mercedes had the ability to do the mixed strategy and get Hamilton through. And then this time, it's completely flipped, and it's Mercedes that actually, the issue with Bottas's tyre, that happens. Like, I don't think any of us could have anticipated that. I don't think they could have anticipated that. And that just, unfortunately, is sometimes that lady luck isn't on your side. But Hamilton's strategy, they were intending for him to go longer anyway. So they boxed him to cover Pierre Gasly's pit. But all they did was meant that there weren't enough tyres to pull away. I just think there was, to be honest, it was just poor and sloppy communication from them. I also think probably this is probably the first time for me we've seen the stress of the championship. I'll get to Hamilton. Is normally it's Max Verstappen getting naggy on the radio and complaining, but this time Hamilton seemed more like he did in 2016 against Rosberg. He was just agitated. He didn't seem happy with any of the team's decisions. The fact that it was bad enough, Gasly jumped him, then Vettel did, and then Perez to jump him as well was just, I think, salt in the wound for him, to be honest. I think he'll leave Monaco feeling incredibly frustrated with the team. Like it is, this will probably be their team's probably only major mistake of the season, but it's given Max Verstappen that momentum now. And I think a lot of people underplay. This is the first time Max has ever led a single-seater championship. He never led the European Formula 3 campaign he did, which he finished third in. Max is now leading. He knows it could be his championship to lose, and this is probably the best shot Red Bull are going to have, especially because we don't know what's going to happen with Red Bull and with Mercedes with the regulation changes next year. So if you're Hamilton and if you're Mercedes, you're worried, especially because Perez wasn't as bad as he normally is. Well, not normally is, but he was close. He was closer, and that gap, but the performance gap between Verstappen and Perez is closing. Perez doesn't need to beat Max, doesn't need to beat Lewis. All he needs to do is beat Valtteri. If he can beat Valtteri Bottas and get those points for Red Bull, he's doing his job in the end. That's what they need. They need a strong support driver to allow Max to have more versatility in his championship strategies and things like that. And so overall, I would say, if you're Red Bull, you're going to be feeling a little bit smug. I think Christian Horner and Helmut Marko are probably having a few beers to celebrate. But
say so. The thing I think is Mercedes are actually beating Valtteri Bottas, let alone Red Bull doing it. We had George Russell beating Valtteri Bottas, in my opinion.
Make a shorter list of people who aren't beating Valtteri Bottas at this point.
And the pit crew really, again, Valtteri Bottas and botched Mercedes pit crew is painful to see. Thiemo, though, championship fight well and truly on as Hamilton. Well, I looked at the results. Verstappen has nothing but first and seconds. Hamilton had nothing but first and seconds. Now he's got seventh. Is this sort of stuff that by the end of this season, that is a sort of fine margins that could lose him the championship?
It will definitely matter. And I think it's interesting that he then went for fastest lap at the end to get that extra point because he knows just how crucial it is. And I will be very interested to see how close the gap between the two of them is at the end, because then if you can base it off fastest lap points alone, that would be quite interesting to see because everyone wasn't sure about them when they were introduced. But then you've got Hamilton pitting and risking potentially being overtaken again later on in the race just so you can get this fastest lap. And so it's interesting to see that come into play there. As for Mercedes, it was just like, what happened to them? Did they employ Ferrari strategists from last year, or what the hell was going on there? But I think you can understand Lewis's annoyance there, because if it was him that had made the mistakes, then he would be first one up, hands up, saying, "Yeah, okay, I cocked up, my bad, I'll deal with it." But he's not doing anything wrong. He's doing the best he can with the car, and it just wasn't the track for it. And then the team just didn't deliver the normal normal 100%, 110% performance, which very rare in Kanyama, but it's great for us to watch to see where we can go, because I don't know, it's still too early to call who's going to win the championship. There's either one of them, but I think it's going to swap back a few times at least, but it's great to have that first move there, and it's going to give Max a lot of confidence going forward, because again, Monaco is not a track that he's done brilliantly at before in the past, and now he's won it and he's beaten Hamilton by a good few places as well, and Perez will be feeling great about it as well, because he seems to be getting up to speed at last. So good stuff.
I think the Perez side of things is showing how important it is to have two drivers in the hunt. It's harsh on Albon, it's harsh on Gasly, but I do think if they were in that second seat this year, Red Bull wouldn't be leading the championship, and we wouldn't have seen at the end of the race, it's the first time I've seen it, a smug-looking Christian Horner with his arms folded on the team's championship graphic. That it's always been Toto Wolff every time I've seen it from what I can remember. So
the photo taken 2 years ago, they've only had to use it now.
Exactly. You mentioned the Ferrari strategist, so Jacob, Ferrari strategist, should they have strategized looking a bit more into Leclerc's car, because he might have had a five-place grid drop, but he couldn't even race at all. How bad did Ferrari drop the ball, or is that something you can't expect?
I don't know. Maybe they got caught in the lights a bit. Obviously, it's hard to overtake around Monaco. So if they had taken the penalty, they would have been down to sixth, and the whole chance to win, would have been expunged completely. So maybe it was just a case of, it's our only chance to win the season. I can't see Ferrari getting another pole or even a chance at another win. So maybe they thought, it's a home race for Leclerc. It's a chance to get our name on the top step of the podium this year. But they're in a championship fight with McLaren as well. It's 3 points between them, and it's going to be like that, I think, for the 2 points. Yeah, exactly. It's very, very tight. So I think that in terms, although the victory is good, I think maybe they should have maybe looked at the problems, but I'm led to believe now it wasn't even the gearbox, more a drive shaft, and they didn't even notice it. So
that's if you believe Ferrari what they're saying there.
Yeah, it's a pinch of salt sort of scenario that I don't think I believe them entirely there.
They come out and say it was the gearbox after everyone say you should have checked that gearbox, and they admit it. They're never going to live it down. So like, no, whatever you say, it wasn't a gearbox, all right?
Yeah, sure, Matteo, but I don't believe what he says at all. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? But at the end of the day, points mean prizes at the end of Formula One, and though you can't get caught up in the emotional side of things sometimes, in hindsight, yeah, they should have checked the car. But I can understand, Ferrari are quite an emotional team. They love the victory. It's an Italian team, so I understand why they didn't check the car, and they would have wanted to put it on pole. But Brundle brought up something quite interesting, actually. It might have been unfair if the car was damaged and they did manage to get it to the grid, how dangerous it could have been having him race. So, but obviously, in the end, he didn't even get round the reconnaissance lap in the end. So, yeah, they should have looked a bit harder, and I think Ferrari have left with a little bit of egg on their face there.
It's the kind of thing, if it was a team further down the grid, you could maybe forgive them for it, but it's Ferrari. It's like you've got everything available to you and more, and yet you still miss these things, which in hindsight should maybe if we ever find out what it was, you should have checked it. Maybe, okay, we didn't check the opposite end of the car that was nowhere near the crash, just to be sure everything's fine. You've got the time, maybe double check it. So it seems a bit of a waste.
You could definitely guarantee that if you could definitely guarantee that, for example, if it was Red Bull and Mercedes in that position, they would have checked the car and they would have taken the inevitable penalty.
So I'd rather have a five-place grid penalty and get some points in rather than just risk it and then not even get a biscuit.
Exactly, yeah. No, I think that it reeks of desperation after what was a poor 2020 for Ferrari.
Egg on the face with a second place trophy. Hannah, though, I do want to come to you and ask, Leclerc's qualifying on pole position or provisional pole, binning it into the barriers, it's got some echoes of Schumacher, some echoes of Rosberg. What do we think? Was that just a genuine mistake, or was that I know how this works, I've lived in Monaco all my life, I know what I'm doing next?
I think, to be honest, it was a genuine mistake. At the time, I did watch it and have that element of going, oh, has he done this deliberately? Has he gone and binned it? But considering the amount of damage that he did, I think that kind of knocked it out of the park. If he had twitched the wall slightly and spun so that they would have yellow flagged the sector, then I'd have maybe said, hold on, that's a bit odd. But he just massively overcooked the corner. And the irony was, I think it was a lot of the drivers were obviously very animated on the radio. Max Verstappen was very annoyed. But in the press conference, he turns around and says, like, I can't judge. I've been there twice before. I think it just proves how much in that qualifying session drivers won the limit. And I think overall, I saw some people online that were saying, oh, if you crash, maybe you should have your pole position taken away. Difficult one, because in the end, accidents happen. If that had have happened in, for example, I don't know, Bahrain, maybe wouldn't have been as big of an issue, but because it was Monaco, it ultimately ruined Charles' race. I think also I would took the Netflix curse as a return for him because he just has no luck at home.
It was quite an amusing thing. Netflix come, you get the curse, just like, well, joke's on you, I'm already cursed here, and then it still backfired.
Yeah, I feel like Charles in Monaco, a match made in hell. They just have no luck there. But I think overall I think Ferrari and Charles as well, it shows that pride maybe comes before the fall, in that they weren't realistic. They dreamt of the victory when their fight isn't there. Their fight is McLaren. They should have taken that penalty. Charles maybe should have been a bit, I know he wants a podium at home, but he had pole. Yes, Max was gaining, but whether he should have been a tiny bit more conservative and I don't want to say accepted the inevitable, but maybe played the long game strategy if he could get a front row finish. But by overcooking it that slight amount, ultimately it wrote off his whole weekend, and now it's done damage to Ferrari, because Ferrari were just lucky that Daniel Ricciardo was struggling, because if Ricciardo would have been up there, who knows whether we would have had a podium for Ferrari at all.
Another struggle weekend for Daniel Ricciardo, you're right, especially painful when you see Lando Norris, fresh from a contract extension, getting on the podium. Lovely to see the reunion of Carl Lando with Sainz and Lando bumping into each other, having a bit of fun. Need to wrap things up, but I do want to, I can't not talk about some of the decisions at Monaco. Serena Williams getting asked questions in the podium, well, just before
it's Monaco,
the podium.
Just let it go.
And the TV direction. I was stand corrected, because I did say initially the only pass of the race, but we did see Schumacher take Mazepin at the hairpin on lap 1.
That was a nice overtake.
Yeah, you don't see overtakes there very often, and when you do, especially the cars that are around the size of a canal boat, I'm very happy to see.
And those two drivers in particular.
I wasn't going to say it, Thiemo, but
that's why I'm here.
But yeah, it was woeful TV direction again at Monaco, where they cut twice away from the only other on-track overtake with Sebastian Vettel coming out of the pit lane. Jacob, how much did that frustrate you?
So much so, Jim. The only overtake on track, barring obviously the Schumacher and Mazepin overtake, and we didn't get to see it, and we didn't even get to see a replay. We had to go on Twitter and look for it, and even then, the replay wasn't that great. But I think it comes down to the fact that obviously FOM do all the other races; they provide the TV world feed. But this, the filming contracts for Monaco is done by a local broadcasting outlet. I'm not sure that. I think it's called TMC or something, and I think it's tied into the whole sort of Monaco contract. But I think FOM and F1 need to take the reins there and take the TV direction on board, because it made what was a bad race incredibly even more frustrating, and some of the graphics were wrong and stuff. It just, even in qualifying, we saw people on a hot lap, and we saw people on a cool, they were 4 seconds down in the first sector. It's like, okay, well, they're on a warm-up lap then. Why are we watching them on board? So incredibly frustrating. And I mean, if you're a fan of Serena Williams, hey, you would have loved this race, but a lot of coverage for her there. But like Thiemo said, we've got to let it slide. It's once a year. It's Monaco. We know what to expect. We've been here. We've done it. And
I think the thing that annoyed me more with Serena Williams was the fact that she was Aston Martin when she's normally a Lewis supporter. I was like, whoa, you're in the wrong team there. What are you doing down there?
Just her being asked at the end was woeful. But I'm going to have to rush you through these bits, guys. Winners and losers. We've got top 3, bottom 3 of both F1 and F2. I want to start with F2 if we can. And I'll go quickly because I need to go through these. My top 3 from this week for F2, Pourchaire, because obviously, Bushong, because well done. Top draw effort from you, mate. And Drugovich, we didn't speak about him, but 2 podium finishes at Monaco. That screams good strategy from Virtuosi, but he had to earn it as well. And the bottom 3 from there, Deledda, say no more. Petkov, not his fault with the engine, but crashing. And then also need to just, because it ruined his weekend, the Prema team for that botched pit stop for Schwartzman. Hannah, top 3, bottom 3, F2.
So my top 3 are Piastri, Dragovic, obviously double podium, and Piastri obviously had a very strong qualifying as well. And I've gone with Ticktum. Even though he had that incident, he was incredibly quick on the streets of Monte Carlo, and it was just unfortunate with what happened. Bottom 3, Petkov, 2 retirements and 16th. It does maybe show that he might be a little bit out of his depth, stepping up from Formula Regional to Formula 2. Schwartzman was clacking the wall. The pit stop, yes, is Prema's fault, but overall it just shows that he's not having the consistency that he needs. And I've gone Zendelli, 15th, 7th, and retired when he clacks the wall. But the fact of the matter is, for sure, he's outshining him at the moment and probably deserves the longer term contract with MP Motorsport for the season.
Jacob.
Top 3. Pourchaire, great victory in what is sort of his, not really his home race, but he was very emotional there, and he showed an absolutely mature driver, only 17 years old. I've chosen Piastri as well. I think he's showing a great maturity and stepping up from F3 in fantastic fashion. And I'm going to give the other one to, as Hannah said, Ticktum. Fantastic. He showed pace, and he tried some really daring overtakes. Was very unlucky at La Rascasse not to get past Piastri. And I think he was quite emotional, so showed a lot of passion there. Bottom 3, Petkov. He was got unlucky with the engine failure. It was always great to see an engine failure like that. We don't often see them anymore. But, yeah, very much so. And he had a crash in the other race. Deledda is going to take up the Mazepin position of probably appearing in every bottom 3 we ever do all season. He was just woeful. And yeah, Schwartzman, although it wasn't helped by the team, a messy weekend, and his championship campaign really isn't getting off to the start that we thought it would.
And Thiemo.
Boschon, for obvious reasons. Piastri, again, for doing just such a great job. And then Aiken, just because it was great to see him back in F2. And I got to give him credit for being back there. So I'm going to have my soft spot for him there. And then we've got the same worst drivers there, Jim. So Petkov, Schwartzman, and Deledda. Say no more.
Yeah, it wasn't Schwartzman for me. I went on the Prema team rather than Schwartzman, but I completely understand. I'm going to whiz through the F1 ones, no reasons this time, but my top 3, Verstappen, Giovinazzi, and Vettel, with a bottom 3 of Ricciardo, Hamilton, and the Mercedes pit crew for this one. Hannah?
I've gone Lando Norris, Sebastian Vettel, and Antonio Giovinazzi as my top 3. And then my bottom 3 is Yuki Tsunoda, Fernando Alonso, and Daniel Ricciardo.
For Tsunoda. Jacob?
Top 3, I've gone for Norris, great to see him 3rd. I've also gone for Vettel, great to see him in a nice 5th place there. And I've also chosen Sainz, he showed great maturity this weekend. Bottom 3, I'm going to stick in there Alonso, Ricciardo, really poor from Ricciardo, and Tsunoda. Yeah, Tsunoda wasn't really anywhere this weekend.
No, it wasn't. Thiemo, F1, top 3, bottom 3.
Carlos, Lando, and Perez, because they all just did exactly what they needed to and did a great job overall for it. And then worst, Yuki, because that reverse strategy didn't really work at all. Ricciardo, just because it was just woeful, unfortunately. And then the 19 car for Haas.
19 car for Haas. I understand what you're trying to say. Right, well, I just want to say thank you everybody for joining us. But Hannah, where can people find you on the internet?
So you can find me over on Twitter. I'm at Hannah Prydderch. If you can't spell it, don't worry. There you can also find my links to my work for Motorsport Week and for Females in Motorsport, and also for Inside F2 and for my YouTube channel, Purple Sector.
Brilliant. Jacob?
You can find me on Twitter at JacobPhil18. You can see my writing at GP Grandstand, where there's a few F1 thoughts coming out today. And you can also hear my lovely voice here on the GP Grandstand podcast every other Monday.
Thiemo?
I'm here, obviously, on GP Grandstand, on YouTube, if you just search for me, Thiemo Albers-Daly, and on Instagram at t.albers.daily.drivetribe, and then at drivetribe, yeah.
Exactly. We'll find those in the show notes or below if you're watching on YouTube. For me, you can find my writing on gpgrandstand.com and fortlock.com. For my satire F1 news, search the F1 week that was on YouTube. And of course, I'm on the Grand Prix Grandstand YouTube channel. We've got an interview with Guan Yu Zhou, which you can find, which was really nice to speak to. But for now, thank you everybody for listening to us talking F1. We'll be talking F1 once again very soon, so keep your ears peeled.